Hello, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I am Nancy Kimmel, and I would like to take a few minutes of your time to kind of go over a short PowerPoint about the link between obesity and type 2 diabetes. I think you might find it interesting, particularly as all of you are going into the medical field and you're anxious to start working with patients. I think it's our responsibility as healthcare providers to help our patients become more intelligible and aware of their diet and not just talking to the patient or talking at the patient, but really working with them and explaining to them how important good eating habits actually are. So let's take a look at type 2 diabetics. Now, for those of you that may not know the exact difference, type 1 diabetics are insulin dependent, so they have to take exogenous insulin 3 or 4 times a day, depending on their blood sugar, because their pancreas no longer makes insulin. The beta cells have been destroyed. Whereas type 2 diabetics, on the other hand, are what we call insulin resistant diabetics. And I want to bring a little bit clearer picture to all of you between the link between obesity, and not just obesity in itself. I mean, body mass index is a predictor or an indicator of obesity, but it's not specific to certain people. Okay, some people are bigger boned, some people have a set point. When we talk about obesity, we're talking about obesity and body mass index greater than 30, greater than 40, morbid obesity, in kilograms per meter squared. But in any case, I'm looking particularly at centripetal obesity. Centripetal obesity is where the girth of the abdomen exceeds that of the chest diameter, and it has been written about in literature that people that have a greater abdominal girth as opposed to their chest diameter are at risk for cardiovascular disease. So let's take a look. Type 2 diabetic. They have functioning pancreas. Pancreas is making insulin from the beta cells. However, the insulin is not able to do its job, and we're going to take a look at why this is. Now, adipocytes, which make up the fatty tissue, are made up, are fat cells. They're lipids, right? They can't dissolve in water. They're lipophilic, they're hydrophobic. We need fat. Fat helps us, it insulates us. As we get older, we lose the fatty tissue. We lose the fat under our skin. And we need fat. Cholesterol is a lipid. It's your triglycerides are saturated fatty acids with a glycerol backbone. So when we take a look at triglycerides and when you take a look at how lipids are distributed throughout our body, when in obese people we have a over exaggeration of adipocytes, too many fat cells. And these fat cells have a tendency to deposit themselves. Possibly there's a genetic predisposition to where they deposit themselves because people have different body shapes. But the point of it is, when lipids travel through our blood, they can't just travel on their own. They have to have a travel buddy. They're actually transported in what we call chylomicrons. And a chylomicron is basically a protein capsule, think of it like a spaceship that has the lipid inside, because that's the only way it can transport lipids, and it transports the lipids to different parts of our body where lipids are needed. For instance, think about the cellular membrane, right? Semi-permeable outer membrane, and there's definitely cholesterol in the membrane, right? Cholesterol is a necessity of our cellular component. But when we have too many adipocytes and we have too many fat cells, we are in a state of inflammation. Why is that? Well, take a look at what macrophages do. What do macrophages do? We know that macrophages are like the Pac-Man of our system, first responders. They get in there and they just kind of chew everything up that shouldn't be there. And they're also responsible for releasing lots and lots of different kind of cytokines, which are inflammation molecules like interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, C-reactive protein. These cause apoptosis and inflammation of neighboring adipocytes. This leads to a loss of a function of the adipocyte, and it causes insulin receptors to become lost. Now, insulin receptors are on the surface of cells, and there is a certain amount of fat and cholesterol on the surface of cells. And when the surface of those cells become damaged, then not only insulin receptors can become damaged, but other receptors for other hormones as well can become damaged. So continuous stimulation of what we call oxidative stress can cause a breakdown in the body's immune system, and these reactive oxygen species can cause a heightened state of inflammation. So this heightened state of inflammation can predispose that person to more risk of infection. It's not that people that are obese automatically manifest with type 2 diabetes. However, the beta cells can only secrete insulin for so long. The more and more someone eats, the more and more the beta cells have to work overtime to produce insulin. And it's like any body or any organ in our system, if it's overworked, it's going to fail eventually, right? Just like the heart fails, or the liver fails when it tries to metabolize too much alcohol. So some people that have are morbidly obese can get non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. These non-esterified fatty acids, they're secreted from adipose tissue in obese people, and some have suggested they may be a culprit in beta cell dysfunction. Now, 9 times out of 10, when we talk about type 2 diabetics, we're talking about insulin resistance. So we're talking about the resistance of the cells to the glucose transporters that allow glucose to go into the cell with its transporter insulin to help it along. So adipose tissue secretes these pro-inflammatory hormones. And the interesting thing is that greater and greater amounts of adipocytes depositing themselves in a specific area, like in people that have the centripetal obesity, what it can do is it can cause also the aromatization of the adipocytes into estrogen, which is why you see men that are very obese have gynecomastia. And it's the same with women. So obviously we know that there's a greater demand for insulin in obese people. And as the demand becomes greater with adiposity, this can also cause a demand in both the liver and the muscles. So the non-esterified fatty acids, major role is the malfunction of insulin biosynthesis by the dysregulation of desensitizing glucose-stimulated insulin secretion. So when we look at the non-esterified fatty acids, their focus is right on the pancreas at the beta cells. But take a look. All these adipocytes, these guys can wreak havoc. Okay, look, we've got all of these inflammatory cytokines. We have aromatization from androgens to estrogen, and we said that everything starts out with cholesterol. We don't really get as much leptin because leptin actually helps mobilize our food and keeps us, keeps our metabolism going. Whereas adipocytes can also produce cortisol. which we know by itself, if people are on cortisone for over 10 days, they can become their glucose levels can go up, they get the moon face, they put on weight, they become at risk for infection for all the same exact reasons that high levels of adipocytes, the same reason that the way adipocytes act. So when you think about where cortisol comes from, right? You think about the adrenal cortex, and you think about the zona glomerulosa, the zona fasciculata, the zona reticularis, and in the zona glomerulosa we have our mineral corticoids, and the zona fasciculata we have our glucocorticoids, and cortisone is dangerous. It lowers our, and we need it obviously, but too much of it can cause muscle wasting, can cause moon phase. It can, and it does this because cortisol too is lipophilic, and it has a means of wanting to deposit its fatty adipocytes in very specific areas of the body, like in people with Cushing syndrome. You see that the fat pads on the back of their neck. And you see the centripetal obesity. So there is a lot of correlation in what we're talking about here when it comes to obesity and the risk of the immune system being, harmed. So uncontrolled secretions of several adipocytokines are associated with stimulation of the inflammatory process, leading to metabolic disorders such as atherosclerosis, insulin resistance, and type 2 diabetes. And this is just an overview of some of the other players in the due to the reactive oxygen species and inflammatory cytokines such as the Janus kinase in smooth muscle, and some of these others that work to impair the neointimal surfaces of our arteries, which can lead to neointimal hyperplasia, which can lead to the deposition of more platelets and leukocytes and scar tissue forming and more deposition and ergo hardening of the arteries. The monocyte chemoattractant protein is a potent chemokine synthesized by our monocytes, renal cells, and tubular epithelial cells, but it's important in stimulating interleukin 6, which is another cytokine. So they are thinking that resistin and visfatin are adipokines which may play a role in gestational diabetes, and a lot of this is up in the air. I've talked to several professors, and some of them say, well, one of them told me, he said, Nancy, he said, I don't know about all this. He says, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Are they type 2 diabetics and then they become obese? Did they become obese and then get type 2? He said, I don't think there's enough evidence out there. But personally, I thought looking at some of these correlations might be, worthwhile. Leptin inhibits the, leptin deficiency, I should say, inhibits the JAK, STAT, and PI3K and insulin pathways. In obese patients, there's an excess of leptin that is produced but not used due to resistance. So leptin can cause an anorectic type of metabolic, how do you say it, anorectic state, where it just basically helps the metabolism work. But in obesity, it's kind of halted even though it's being produced. So in conclusion, I want everybody to kind of take a minute to think about how important it is to talk to patients about eating healthy. If you like Coke, maybe switch to, Diet Coke, or, I'm not a big fan of, artificial sweeteners, but, get away from that fructose corn syrup. My whole purpose in this lecture was to bring some clarity to make some correlations between centripetal obesity specifically and type 2 diabetics. and are those people that have centripetal obesity and develop type 2 diabetes. So something to think about, and hope to talk to you all soon. Thank you. Have a good day.